This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Helene Woods, and this is Let's Quilt, episode number 3. Today I'm going to show you how we applique. We have this little block that we're going to put on our wall hanging, and then we're going to put some borders on, and the borders will be the red and the white. Let's get started. Now I'm going to show you how we're going to applique our little square here on the front of our wall hanging. We're going to start first by taking the square that we've already cut, and I've turned in about 1/4 inch, and I've taken this little gauge here that I have, and I can get a pretty good idea of what we're going, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to press that. We're going to do that on all 4 sides. One more to go. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a little trick that I do, because this is quite thick. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of fabric in here. I just take my scissors and make a little diagonal cut there, and that relieves some of the thickness of the fabric, so that when we start stitching, your needle will be able to penetrate easier on your square. Okay, we get those all cut off. Now we're going to put our fusing on. And I'm going to just cut a few strips of this fusing. Now I just purchased the type that we use for hemming, and I can buy that at the grocery store. It's no problem at all. And I'm going to put this on. I'm going to show you that I like to be able to have the points of our little block be exact as we possibly can. And their I'm going to put the fusing down there, and I'll put some fusing here. Now that should hold our block pretty well. So we want to make sure that the points are in this seam, and that these points are as exact in the center of the block here. I think that looks pretty good. So then I'm going to take my iron, I'm just going to place it on top of there and just leave that on for a few seconds and big it off there. So that should take care of appliquing that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew it on there to make sure that it stays there. The first thing we want to talk about when you start to stitch on your applique is the type of stitch that you're going to be using. Now, if you have a zigzag or a satin stitch in your machine, I suggest you go ahead and use it, because that makes a nice edging, but you don't have to. In this piece here, I just use a straight stitching, and I use the navy blue thread, so it matched my block. Today, when I'm stitched this, I'm going to use a contrasting thread. I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch today, and as you can, I'm going to show you a little piece of fabric that I have made a sample. And there I've started very wide, and I just kept narrowing it down until I got to where I thought would be a nice size to piece on this little block with. Let's start stitching. Now the first thing I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you hold your top thread that you're going to be using and have it centered pretty well on where you're going to start stitching, and I'm going to have you bring that down. Lower your presser foot and then bring that needle back up, and then when you do that, then you're going to be bringing up your bobbin thread, and it's important to have that bobbin thread coming up when you start stitching. And we'll take that and we're going to put it back underneath the foot. And that way we're ready to go. When you start on this project, this part of it, I want to have your needle, if you can, in the right swing. Now, if you notice when you do your zigzag, the needle will be going back and forth, back and forth. Now, I'm looking at mine, and it's in the left swing, and I really don't want that. So I'm going to put that down, and then I'm going to make sure that when I start, that it will be in the correct swing. So I'll take this out of the way, but we've got the needle coming in the right direction. I still have to bring up my bobbin thread again. So I'm going to put this back down, and I'll bring up my bobbin thread, and we can start. There, my needle is in the correct position, and it's going to go down there. So that's really good. Now, as we continue stitching, you're going to see you're going to have the biggest part of your stitch on the blue fabric, and then just a tiny, tiny bit on the white. So we'll just continue on down here, and then I'm going to show you how you can come around the corner. Okay, we're here at the end of the block. Now, I want you to have your needle in the right swing of the needle, and we're going to raise our pressure foot, and we're going to turn it completely. And we bring it back down so that you will notice now that the needle is in a perfect place just to continue on with your sewing. And I'm going to continue on with that, and then we'll do that as we come to each corner. Coming to our corner, and there again we want to get to the very end but not run off of your blue fabric. Then have the needle in the right hand swing, lift our presser foot up and bring it down. Now, I actually could go a couple of more stitches. A lot of times you can't tell exactly, so it's good to practice. Now let's see how that one is. Oh, I could actually do one more. So there, right hand swing, there. That is perfect. Then I can just continue on. We get to a point here where we have several layers of fabric. A stiletto or a little bamboo skewer, if you have that, you can kind of guide your fabric into the needle, and that way you're not injuring your fingers or anything like that. There, all right, we finished that. And I'm going to raise up my needle. Very slowly bring this out, and there we've stitched our applique. So we have our piece all appliqued, and it looks pretty good. Now we're going to start putting on our red borders, and these are our first borders. I would like for you to think of a border as a type of a frame that's going to go around your wall hanging, just like in a picture. You always have a frame and a mat. And we take this, and we're going to use our long pieces first, because we're going to sew on the long sides first. First of all, I would like for you to take the long piece, and it's not so important in this wall hanging, but it will be if you get into quilting, to make sure when you start with your bindings, you're starting and making sure you have enough fabric at either end when you get going. So I just take my long piece of fabric here, I'm going to finger press that in the center. And then, and this, it doesn't matter so much because we've already got a seam there, but we would fold this in half, and there we would finger press that also. So we have a center, and that's how we will first start pinning. Right sides together, and would pin this on to the border itself. So I'll take my pins and I'll start pinning. When I had you cut your borders, I had them, you can make them just a little bit longer, but now we can trim those off and make them even with our blocks that we're going to be sewing on. So I'll just cut those off just like that, and then we can start sewing. Now we're going to start stitching on our borders. If you've had your sewing machine in a zigzag or satin stitch mode, be sure to take that off first. And as you can see, I've gone back to my little piece of masking tape for my 1/4 inch seam, which we're going to be doing with our borders. So let's start sewing our borders. Okay, we've got our first red border on, and now I'm going to start, and I'm going to finger press my next border, and I'm going to lay it on here and pin it, and we'll start sewing it too. And we have these all pinned here. Don't forget to snip off your ends again, just like we did on the other side. Then you can sew this piece on too. We now have our side borders sewn on, and I'm going to show you the best way to do these. We can press it on the back, but we always make sure that the seam allowance is going towards the border itself. So we'll just press this down and press that down. Sometimes it's easier to do this on the back side because you want to make sure that that seam is going, the seam allowance is going towards the border itself. Okay, let's turn it over. It looks pretty good. So if you see a little place where there's a little bit of, you want to make it a little bit snugger, you can bring your iron and just put it on there, and that will take care of that. Now we're going to put the end borders on and the top borders on. I had already done my finger pressing on both of these, so I had an idea, and I have done it here on my quilt, my wall hanging. So there, that'll be just right. So there again, we're going to pin those now, and we're just going to snip off these ends and make it nice and even with the previous border that we had put on. And this makes a very nice frame for your wall hanging. So I finished this border. I'm going to turn my wall hanging over, and we're going to start on the other end. We have both of our end borders on now. Now we're going to go back over, we're going to press these, and we're going to put on our white borders. Now we're ready to put on our white borders. And there again, we're going to start with the long sides first. And we're going to do a little finger pressing. So we get in the center of the border itself, and then we're going to take our wall hanging and folding it in half and finger press that also. So we know we've got a nice center point, and we're going to put our border on, right sides together, just like we did on the other two, and we're going to pin these and sew them also. Now we're going to put the final borders on the top and the bottom of our wall hanging. We've got both the borders pinned on. Now I'm just going to take my scissors and cut off the ends a little bit to make sure that we get a nice straight edge for our seam. Now we're going to sew the last portion of our borders, the top and the bottom. there's our wall hanging. We're going to leave our quilt here, and we're going to go over to the cutting table, and I'm going to show you how to make a sandwich for your quilt. We take the time to make a sandwich and using the same fabric that we're going to be using in our quilt, so that when we start sewing, we're going to be using either a nylon filament thread or regular thread, and we have to make sure that we get all those stitches correct and make sure that your tension is correct. And it's best to do that in just a little practice piece rather than doing it on your wall hanging itself. These are 3 layers of fabric, and it's the same fabric that I have used in the wall hanging. That's important. You don't want to bring another type of fabric in and then try to make it work. So there are the 3 colors, 3 different types of fabrics we will be using for the sandwich. I've changed my regular thread and put in nylon filament line that what I'm going to be using for sewing my top of my quilt. I've changed out my regular foot and put on my walking foot so that I can move along very well with that. And at this time we want to check our bobbins and our tension to make sure that it's working really well. So let's just sew a little bit and see what happens. But I have sewn a line of stitching, and I've checked. My top stitches seem to be pretty good, and my bobbin and my tension seems to be fine. I'm going to suggest that you lengthen your straight stitching seam just a little bit. We were doing, say, 12 inches to the stitch before, maybe take it 15 or 16 and see how that works out for you. The stitching on the quilt does not have to be tight. I suggest that you keep your little sandwich on hand, because as we get into quilting, the wall hanging, in case anything comes up and stitches aren't looking quite right, stop working on your wall hanging and get your sandwich out and work on it to make sure that you get everything back under control for yourself. For our next show, we're going to be finishing up our wall hanging, and at that time you're going to need some batting. Whatever depth you want to is fine. We're going to need 5/8 of a yard for our backing, our binding, and our sleeve. Now, if you have extra fabric that you would like to use up for your backing, that's fine. It does not have to be in one piece. You can go ahead and make it any piece, any size you want it to be. We're also going to need a dowel or a yardstick to put on our sleeve so that we can hang our wall hanging up in our house when it's all done. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.